Hello and welcome to IBM's Beyond Firewalls, Resilience Strategy for All. Today we're going to focus on the importance of cyber and data resilience, and we're really going to unpack what organizations can do to stay ahead of the trends that the bad actors are using. I'm Rob Strechay, Managing Analyst with theCUBE Research. Today I will be speaking to a great list of folks from IBM that are helping organizations with their cyber and data resilience on a daily basis. First, we're going to start off with Jeff Kroom, who's IBM's Distinguished Engineer, CTO, IBM Security Americas, and Chris Volmar, who's Storage and Data Resilience Architect Worldwide for IBM Canada. And this, we're going to really dive into and start talking about the people, the processes, and the technology, because it's not just one, it's all of the above that are really used to help you understand and be prepared for cyber and data resilience. Then we're going to delve into where to start, some interesting organizational use cases, and where do you start with things like the NIST framework and NIST Framework 2.0, which is in draft form today. Next, we're going to unpack things and some of the technology that IBM is applying to cyber and data resilience with Ram Parasuraman, an Executive Director for IBM and heads up product management. We're going to be discussing the power of Storage Defender and how it is a critical piece for signaling what's going on at the data layer to help break down silos between SecOps and data teams, and that will give you a true idea of what recovery means for your organization and how to get to recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives that make it for your minimally viable company. Stay tuned for that. It's a really interesting discussion. Then we'll get into things with Del Hubler, Principal Storage Specialist, where we will discuss what makes some real-time technologies and processes that help people with some real-world examples. We'll take an understanding for some companies where they were able to go into and recover from some incidences and what they learned from that experience. We'll also be exploring why it's critical to define what cyber and data resilience means to your company, and we'll go even further understanding the cyber and resilience assessment that IBM offers free of charge, that's included and provided by IBM at their expense. So really, stay tuned for this and more during today's episodes of IBM Beyond Firewalls, Resilience Strategies for All here on theCUBE. Today, I'm joined by two experts in the field. Really excited to have you guys on here. Jeff Kroom, IBM Distinguished Engineer and CTO, IBM Security Americas, and Christopher Volmar, who is the Storage and Data Resilience Architect Worldwide for IBM Canada. Thanks for coming down from the Great White North.
Thanks very much.
Coming up from North Carolina to join us here today.
My pleasure.
You know, I think what is a lot of fun about this, and it's Cyber Resilience Month, and I think everybody kind of used to be called Backup Month or something like that, and I think it's much better to have a fuller description of what companies are really dealing with from a cyber perspective. And a big piece of that is, again, everybody's dealing with it. It's not just the big names, but there have been some big names, and there is really a cost to cyber resilience and not doing it right or being hit over and over again. What do you guys feel about that? What is the cost? Let's kind of start at the endings of the story, the cost of it, and let's work backwards from that.
Sure. The cost of doing it wrong. IBM's been running this report called The Cost of a Data Breach. We actually contract with a third-party organization to do it so that we get really independent results. And we've run this for 18 years. So we've got a large empirical base of data. We've interviewed 3,000 people from 500 organizations. So this isn't like just cherry picking. And one of the things that we found for this most recent report, average cost of a data breach worldwide is about $4.5 million per incident. Now, that's even throwing out the really large data breaches because they would end up skewing the results, but that's what it looks like. In the US, it's roughly twice that. So the cost of not doing it right is really substantial.
Yeah, I mean, we heard, again, with the MGM being in the in the news and everything. That one was 100 million, at least. And I think, again, some of us were actually down there and couldn't check into our hotel rooms until 2 in the morning. Yeah. So I think, again, when you start to look at it, it's also, what can organizations do to prepare? Everybody's at kind of a different place in their cyber resilience journey. Where should they start? What are the things that they should do to really understand their attack surface and start to get that covered?
Well, one thing that came from that report is that the most significant way to cut the cost of a data breach was organizations who had an extensive use of AI and automation. They saved on average 1.76 million off of that 4.5 million. That was the most significant way to cut the cost of that data breach. And if you start thinking about it, we're really very early days of AI use in the cybersecurity space. So I would expect that number is only going to rise as we go forward. Using automation makes a big difference. Using AI going forward can make potentially an even bigger difference. So tooling and leveraging that as a force multiplier can definitely benefit the good guys.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's not just the big companies that can benefit from that. It's the medium-sized, the small companies, especially if you don't have a security organization or a storage organization that is really tied tightly to an organization that has the tooling there. I think that actually brings you up a level as well. It's an up leveler to that. But, again, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the infrastructure and storage and the role that infrastructure and storage play in this. What are you seeing from that side of things?
Well, and even to your point of where do I start and how do I make it accessible for everybody? Part of that is just integrating the security and the storage, integrating infrastructure and security teams together, whether that be a storage team or the team is covering all the parts of the infrastructure, tying it into the security part of the organization. And kind of look at that, what's my foundational layer? How do I get steps to data resilience is the kind of thing we'll talk about. How do I get there? Like the first foundational layer is how do I integrate those two teams? And that's for a lot of the customers we're working with right now, that's the first step in their journey is I've got a security team and they know what they're doing, but have they tied in with what infrastructure and where the data lives on the storage platform? And how do I pull those two together? Because during that data breach, if I've had a data corruption, a malware, a ransomware, something like that, how do I bring clean copies of the data back? But I got to start with, I got to pull those two teams together so they're actually working in lockstep.
Yeah, but are copies even enough? I mean, what do people need to do from a storage perspective to protect the data? Because that really, when you see these cyber actors, bad actors going after this stuff, a lot of times they're going after the storage to do that. What can people do to really take that and take it to the next level, I guess you could say?
Well, we look at it from a couple of different ways, and I'd say that yes, copies are important, and you want to build immutability into your strategy of copies, whether that be on the primary storage devices, whether that be on the secondary, the backup storage devices. I probably want to build immutability into both. And I want to probably also want to be able to build the capability to take snapshots, copies on both environments. And that way, if I've got immutability, even if bad actors do get in, they're going to try and delete things, I've got immutable copies to work with. And I've got copies now in both primary and secondary. In my DR, I can then start to look at, okay, well, how do I validate for good data? How do I use those copies proactively, maybe even, to validate for good data, certainly reactively. But if I can get to a proactive level of, hey, I've got copies in my primary, I've got copies in my secondary. How can I start testing those to make sure that if something does happen, I have the ability to do a rapid recovery? So it's kind of working my way up through those steps to think about how do I get there and how do I get to a point where I can recover rapidly and then take advantage of things like automation, right? Because pulling one thing back is something, but pulling an entire farm back is entirely different, right?
Right, yeah, I mean, and I think that's the big thing is you're not just pulling one thing back when you have to recover an infrastructure. It's you got to pull everything back for the most part and to some point in time, and you need to know that the stuff hasn't been hiding in there. And I mean, to that kind of point, there's the kind of the CIA triad, and I don't mean like, Central Intelligence Agency here. And you guys really talk to that framework and its importance in how it actually brings the two different organizations together. So why don't we kind of tell people what it is first off, and then go into that.
This is fundamental, just basic blocking and tackling when it comes to security. It's the CIA triad is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the three things that we're trying to accomplish in cybersecurity always. And if you look at a new environment, this is what you should look at. What are my requirements for confidentiality so that only the authorized users can see the information if it's sensitive? What are the requirements for integrity? That is that the data hasn't been tampered with. It can be trusted in. And then the requirements for availability, that it's available to the people that it's supposed to be available to when they need it. So it's CIA. And you look at how you do those things. And in fact, even though we sort of think of this as a security thing, you can see very clearly there's a storage aspect to every one of those three aspects of the CIA triad.
Yeah, no, I mean, like confidentiality, integrity, and availability, those are like the core of what you need, right?
Core of trying to bring back a business. And to your point about being able to bring back an environment, we look at things like, how do I build out the minimum viable company, right? What's the minimum things I need to do to be a company that functions, right? If I'm a financial institution, I gotta do trades, I gotta do banking. And then to the idea of that CIA triad, it absolutely fits in everything we do with storage and with data, is being able to know where my confidentially governed material or my PII type of data, how do I make sure that's available? How do I make sure the integrity behind it, whether it's in my copies or in my backups, is available for me to be able to start pulling back at any given moment, whether that's be proactively checking it for corruption or reactively being able to check it and then bring it back into your environment at a bad event. Want to think about all three of those things and how they relate back into a storage environment.
Yeah, I mean, really, the validity of it,
Absolutely.
Again, is a big piece of how you understand that, yes, it's a known good, right? Yep. And I think that, to me, also, authentication and authorization is a huge piece. I mean, that's how a lot of the social engineering people are targeting that and trying to leverage that, and that's how the MGM thing went, and everybody knows that. But when you start to look at how you build that in to make sure that there's no one set of keys to the kingdom kind of thing. When you're looking at this across storage and the rest of the infrastructure, how do you also look at data validity? I think that, to me, is one of the ones that has to be a key to what people are trying to do, is that known good copy or that known valid that people can get at. How is IBM helping really your customers with that part of it?
Well, I'd say from our perspective, at least in storage, is being able to do that kind of ability, proactive checking, right? So if I can make copies of the data and I can do it on my primary systems, I can do it on my backup systems. They're both immutable, and then can I proactively promote them into some place, whether it's a clean room or a safe room or a vault or something, but can I move them into a place that I could then do proactive testing against, right? And to that idea of it's accessible for anyone, right? So from the base storage systems all the way to the really big storage systems, how do I make those copies, promote them into a place that I could test them for validity? A bunch of tools, right? Whether it's tools we bring, tools our customers bring, a bit of both to be able to do a valid checking of things, and then know that I've got it ready to go, saying, okay, I've got my catalog of good, clean copies that are this current, this current, this current. You can then drive to things like automation to be, okay, if something's happened, I know this is the steps I'm going to drive through. I might integrate up into like a SOAR environment and be able to drive the automation to say, as security is getting the environment ready for me to come back in, I already know my clean good copies because I've done scanning, I've done integrity checking, I've done any number of different checks to make sure that those things are available. But doing it on something like a primary storage system, for us is a differentiator, as well as being able to do it in a backup environment is for us a differentiator as well, I'd say.
Yeah, and I would say that, again, obviously, I mean, encryption's been around for quite some time, but again, that playing into the validity of it and the integrity of it has to be a big thing that you're seeing. And again, it was a big thing. I was at one of the cloud providers and people would leave their buckets open and, not encrypted and stuff like that. Are you seeing that people are really just by default using encryption finally and what they're doing?
Not as much as I'd like. In fact, if you think about ransomware as one of those use cases that really stresses both the cybersecurity and the storage sides of the house. Because if you think about ransomware as a particular attacks, there's really two main types of ransomware attacks. One is I've got your data and I'm not going to give it back unless you pay me. The other is I've got your data and I'm about to give it to everybody else. Now that second one, the best protection against that is good encryption. If the attacker says, I've got your data, I'm about to give it to everyone else, and you say, well, but it's strongly encrypted, have at it, well, then you don't worry as much. On the first one, I've got your data and I'm not going to give it back, well, then that's where you want the good backup. the immutable backup. And Chris mentioned that before. And immutability, I mean, that means that your backup can't be changed. It's not sufficient just to have a backup out there, because if someone puts ransomware on your system and it starts encrypting all your files, it will also encrypt all your backups as well. And then you have nothing to recover with. So an immutable backup will be one that it shows a point in time and it won't be modified. So when the attacker in that case comes to you and says, I've got your data and I'm not going to give it back, then you say, guess what? I've got my data too. You can go get lost. So again, there's security technology and storage technologies that come together. And to me, there's no end where one starts and the other begins. You know, they're both just related to each other constantly.
Yeah, and to your point about Jeff's point about basic blocking and tackling, that's where I'm starting to see customers, how do I build out that design where I'm actually encrypting things at the application layer? And that brings in the challenge, okay, I need to sit down and actually do the key management, but also I'm able to encrypt things in the storage device. Where do I place that? But then how do I build a governance around it? And that idea of how do I actually understand what I've got encrypted, where it is, all of that is accessible again to kind of everybody, right? It isn't, hey, I only do encryption if I'm a really, really big shop. It's all the way through. I've got the ability to do it, and it's not necessarily as cost prohibitive as you'd think. It's one of those simple basic blocking and tackling you can do to protect the data and protect the environment, right?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I think you actually roll into the next question I have for both of you, which is, where do you get started? I mean, NIST is moving to 2.0. It's, you know, in draft now and being reviewed and things like that. Where should people start? Where should they really look at? And because again, some companies, the security entire security group is a person or two people, hopefully, and at least more than one. But and the storage might be a storage admin, and or the storage admin who wears multiple hats. They're the VM admin,
Absolutely.
they're the container admin, they're DevOps, and all of that. So where should people start? Is NIST a good place for them to start? Where would you suggest?
Sure. The cybersecurity framework is the specific NIST standard you're referring to that is very comprehensive in telling you what are the things you need to have in running a security program. So it's a very good place to start. If you think about it, NIST, that cybersecurity framework, is based on the CIA triad. So it all starts with that, and then we expand it. Okay, so this is like a further expansion, a further explanation of what it means to do CIA. And then from there, there's individual technologies and architectures and things like that we can do. Another thing that I think you overlay on top of all of that are zero trust principles. The idea that you assume the system has already been breached. A lot of people have said to me, zero trust is not so different. That just sounds like, you know, a lot of vendors talk about this, but this is not new. It's just defense in depth. It is, but it's more. Because if you assume that your systems, the bad guy is already in them, the way you design the security is very different. If you were thinking about how do you secure your home, you might build in perimeter-based controls like, you know, a fence, a lock on the door, a security camera, an angry dog inside the fence. Okay, this is how you're keeping the bad guy out. But if the bad guy's already on your sofa right now, watching TV, eating your food, then none of those countermeasures made any difference at all. So we tend to focus on the perimeter and we assume things that are not always true. So that implicit trust is the thing that comes back to bite us. We need to design security from the inside out. Assume each one of the components has been breached. Now what? So if I do that, then, and by the way, that's not an unreasonable thing to assume, because going back to that cost of a data breach report, it turns out it's on the order of 200 days that it takes on average for an organization to realize that they have been breached. So, and then another 70 some odd days for them to contain that breach. So you're looking at about 300 days, the better part of a year, that the bad guy has been in there doing damage before you realized that in fact there's somebody, again, think about this, if the bad guy was living in your home for 200 days before you realized, and then it took you another 70 days to get him evicted, I mean, that would be nuts. That's the average. So this is why we've got to have better, more forward-thinking, more preventative type of controls and assume breach. Once you assume breach, then you know I'm going to have to recover because the system is never secure. It's always varying degrees of security, which means if the system can be hacked, I need ultimately an ability to recover from that attack. And that's why, to me, there's no separation between security and resiliency, because the system has to be resilient because it will be attacked.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think on the storage side, because you're at the data, right?
Yep.
And you see things like high I/O going to something that has been dormant for ever, and that may be a signal of encryption taking place and things like that. Where do you see people starting as well?
Well, I'd say even to that point, we take it a step further inside the IBM Flash system. We're doing things like inline data corruption detection, where we're actually looking and sampling at I/O going, does this meet certain parameters that actually might meet a pattern of the data is being encrypted as a real-time thing, as the I/O is hitting the system. So we're taking that even that step further. To your point about where to start, and I'll do a yes and to kind of what Jeff said around NIST, is like NIST is a really good place to start. I think NIST is looking at that because it actually, if you put the lens over it that both security and storage work together to what Jeff and I do every day now, it is, even from the identify, detect, protect, all of those places have places that storage and security can augment each other. And then to your other question about where do we start, a lot of customers work with us. We have something called a cyber resiliency assessment. And that cyber resiliency assessment isn't, it isn't pervasive. It isn't, hey, I'm dropping tools in the environment. It is a good 2-hour discussion-based structure that will come back with recommendations. Say, hey, these are some of the principles you could look into. These are some of the approaches you could look into. And that cyber resiliency assessment kind of helps drive out, well, if I look at towards 2024, right? What's my priorities for the next year? We've got customers that are, I do my VMware, I do my storage, that's me, and I have Jeff over here is doing security. The two of us sit down and actually go through this kind of, discussion-based structure that we've got for the cyber resiliency assessment that gives us some priorities we could collaborate on for next year. And from the small to the big, that gives me at least a place to start. And then say, okay, well, what pieces can I pull together? And we based it around that NIST framework so that then you can use it as a jumping off point.
Yeah, and I think, again, for folks who are looking to get at it from hey, we don't know where to start, we don't know what's going on, and we have never even done a tabletop exercise or something like that, getting in the room is a good first step.
Absolutely.
And, if the fact that there's no cost to this assessment and things of that nature
it's
is
IBM
even
funded,
better. I think that to me is such a fantastic place to start, because I think when you start, going around the, NIST wheel and stuff like that, you don't have to be the largest company, right? I mean, you could start small. It's not like intergalactically. I think that's the advantage of NIST, is that it's pretty simple to read. I mean, even I can read it, not being a security guy, and understand it.
Well, and I think you even raise a really good point, is it can be intimidating for us in infrastructure to sit down and look at it like, what are all these pieces going? But NIST has done a really good job of maybe democratizing that kind of information and making it approachable for everybody who has a security background. You can sit down and look and go, okay, these 5 steps, now there'll be a 6th one as the 2.0 version's coming around. They all make sense. All right, now, and then to extend your point, if I'm sitting beside the security person in my organization, I can ask them, hey, what does this mean? How does this relate to you? And as they give the answer, you'll probably start to think, oh, that's how it relates to me. So, to your point of, even if it's 3 or 4 people sitting in a room doing a tabletop conversation, that part, and we drive it, say, through that cyber resiliency assessment, it's IBM funded, to your point, it becomes, hey, I can do this type of thing, and it doesn't have to be, I need 15 people, and they got to show up with 5 cases of tools, and we're going to be here for 2 months. It's how do we use things that make sense to work together, and then we get to learn off each other. And that, I think, has been an interesting adventure for the both of us, is we're actually learning off of each other on a regular basis, because now we're doing way more collaboration than we did 18 months ago.
Sure, and that cybersecurity framework, if you look at the whole thing, it can be intimidating because there are so many things. It's very complete and comprehensive. It doesn't mean you have to do all of it on day one. Whatever, you pick an area and you start to improve in that area, then you pick another area and start to improve, and you do this stepwise refinement until you get closer and closer toward the goal. Because the one thing I heard a long time ago that really stuck with me is that if you're satisfied with your security, so are the bad guys. So we have to always be improving in that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think that's a great place for us to kind of leave off. I think, again, providing a lot of content to everybody out there, and good places for them to start and think about how they really up their game, during this Cyber Resilience Month that we're in here, and really take those next steps, because I think it's so important for people to just, you got to start somewhere. You got to,
Absolutely.
Sitting idly because the bad guys aren't. That is for sure. So I want to thank you both, for coming on board here and being on theCUBE with us. You're now alumni. So
awesome, thank you.
Congratulations, Jeff and Christopher. Really appreciate you being on here. And thank you all for visiting here and watching this, and stay tuned for more episodes. Also, for more information, go to the resources tab. A lot of the things that we talked about, the YouTube videos and some of the reports and things of that nature, and the resilience audit, we're going to have links to those in the resource tab below. So be sure to check that out. And also, remember, you can stay up to date on all things cyber and data resilience by visiting SiliconANGLE.com. And thank you for watching this episode of IBM's Beyond Firewalls, Resilience Strategies for All on theCUBE, the leader in high-tech enterprise analysis and coverage.
It's hard to say if the hackers are still in the network.
Where's this even coming from?
As a CIO, there's nothing scarier to me than rising cybersecurity risk.
They look to be the victim of a major data breach.
Security standpoint, we are monitoring threats throughout the world.
Just go phone the FBI. Take the situation.
Bring all the technologies under one roof, join them together to come out with positive business outcomes.
I've seen so many ways that data has been lost.
We give what you need, we predict it, we do it at a very low cost, and we make it easy.
We were able to recover everything.
I need some answers.
I'm joined by Ram Parasoman, Executive Director with IBM. Welcome, Ram.
Great to be here. Thank you, Rob.
I'm glad to have you in here because I think, again, this is near and dear to my heart. Again, being Cyber Resilience Month here in October, I think, there's a lot people can learn from what IBM has been doing. It has a rich history. You and I have both a lot of experience in this industry as well. So let's kind of jump into some of the practical aspects of what's going on in cyber and data resilience. Why don't we start off with, what's critical in the role that you're playing with IBM and what you're up to at IBM?
Yeah, for sure. So I am responsible for end-to-end data resiliency. As you know, one of the primary targets for the bad guys, the bad actors, is the data. So what does it take to deliver end-to-end data resiliency, right? We've heard this quite a bit, but what does that entail and how can we bring it to the market? That's my primary responsibility. So I am responsible for product management for data resilience.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a huge amount of effort, and the landscape and the attack surface is just huge from a data perspective. I think especially with ransomware and other cyber threats that are coming, to fruition at this point in time, there's so many different vectors that bad actors are taking. At the same time, some of the most successful are leveraging social engineering and other things that are outside of it, and then they're able to get into this. So what are you seeing? Because you're out there talking to customers quite often. What are some of the key issues that you're seeing in the cyber resilience landscape?
Yeah, if you look at it, ransomware is the type of attack that grabs the headlines. It's just so pervasive, right? So what I like to tell our customers is basically ransomware is like a bachelor's degree. So it's kind of a must-have, or kind of all attackers are well-versed with what ransomware is. The reason it takes or grabs the headlines is it's so popular and voluminous, right? But attackers are not sitting just on ransomware. They're moving beyond, right? So today, if you look at it, I think exfiltration, stealing of data, leaking it in the dark web, these are more commonplace than they were when we began COVID, right, in 2019. So these are the master's degree, the PhDs, if you will. So the attackers are not just getting more sophisticated in the kinds of attacks they cause, but they're also doing it pretty fast and causing more damage. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a key, right, is that the speed at which these attacks are taking place has just increased tenfold. And I think, again, we all love, and if you don't say the word AI in something, you get a bad mark on the interwebs. And so when you start to look at it, how is it that we can keep up with the speed? Because like the emails that used to start the ransomware attacks now look and are formatted really nicely out of LLMs and things of that nature. How is it that we can really keep up, or how can organizations keep up with the speed of these attacks?
Yeah, this reminds me of a scene from Top Gun Maverick, right? So it's like the bad guys have the same manuals we do, right? So it's like you got to throw away the conventional wisdom, if you will. It's interesting you mentioned AI. Just like we have access to AI to help with detection, the bad guys have access to the same AI, right, to help cause attacks faster, right? So it's about how you use and harness the tools, if you will. There's research from IBM that states what used to take attackers 60 days to cause these attacks today takes less than 4 days.
Yeah.
So you figure the math, right? And whereas the response, it's still roughly about 2 to 3 weeks for us to give a basic or kind of initial response to these attacks. So we are not moving as fast as the bad guys are, right? So it says something about, the impedance mismatch between how fast those guys are causing attacks and how pervasive those attacks are to the enterprise.
Yeah, it's just crazy because I think that when you start to look back at how fast they're moving and how they are using all the same tools, ultimately, I think AI will give the defenders a better chance than it does because I think it helps with, from our perspective in the organizations we talk to, they're seeing it as a way to help level the playing field a little bit, how to upskill their defenders inside there, or, especially at the small or medium-sized business where they may not have as many people or that person is wearing multiple different hats. What are you seeing and how are you trying to help organizations come up to speed with that or gain that speed?
Yeah, one of the things which mentally when you talk about defenders, the one thing that comes to your head is they're all united, they're standing in formation and they're sharing intelligence, right? So, but that's not what you see in practice in enterprises. I think what's hurting the most are silos between teams, between products, and between intelligence, right? So there is not that sharing. So if you take data teams, AI teams, storage teams, and your security teams, these are all disparate teams within the organization where there is not a clear collaboration between these teams in the face of an attack. Right? So what happens and why it takes us to much longer to respond to attacks than the attackers to cause it is because we are not able to share and collaborate information so that we get to that recovery plan soon enough. Right? So one of the key things we need to do as an industry is to break these silos. Right? Because the longer these silos exist, the longer it's going to take us to respond to those attacks.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, again, what I look at is that it has to be not just, hey, I call up or I Slack or I Teams or whatever methodology of chat that you're using, but it has to be more integrated into the products that they're using ultimately. What are some of the things that you're on the product management side, what are some of the things that you're bringing to the table to help organizations really get a handle on that and come up to speed and really deal with that?
Yeah, so it's really boils down to three things, right, Rob? So one of the first things is detection, right? So the earlier you detect, the better. But it's not about you just saying, I detected something. It needs to be high fidelity, right? So basically saying, hey, I've detected something, but that's highly reliably, you can say that that's an attack, right? Because you don't want, there is already alert deluge, right?
Yeah.
Security teams deal with trillions of alerts a day and they don't know what's credible and what's not. So you want to be sure that the alerts are kind of accurate and high fidelity, right? In addition to being early. So that's one thing, right? And we'll talk about it a little more, I guess. The second one is, this is very important, safe recovery, right? Because again, the last thing you want is to recover some data and then be attacked again, right? Or to lose a lot of data and be through super safe, inconvenience your customers. So safe recovery is extremely important. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. The final one is really integration of the existing workflows between security and storage. So again, this is the thing where we say, hey, it's not about some team detecting, an attack, another team being called into the rescue, and these teams are not on the same page, right? It's about how can we make these more collaborative, not just during wartime, which is when an attack is on, but also during peacetime as a discipline, right? Just to improve the rapport between these teams and get them working together.
Yeah, I think that's totally key. All three of them are very key. And is this where Defender comes in and how it helps organizations really get a hold of that?
Yeah, so IBM Storage Defender was pretty much founded to solve these problems, right? So really it's about bringing together all of the technologies that exist today, but that don't work with each other, right? And across your data estate, right? So one of the primary things we have to set as a boundary condition here is to say, you cannot really exclude any part of data, right? Because people have conventionally talked about this as, hey, you know, I'm a backup company. I looked at backup data and I'm ensuring a backup is immutable. And, you know, kind of I can bring together a backup when you need it, right? So that's kind of one half of the problem. But on the other, there is this primary storage, right? Or primary critical workloads that get stored on arrays and flash storage, which basically is being handled by a different team. And there is a different set of tools that are managing those. But when it comes to an attack, you just don't know where the recovery is going to occur from. Are these primary hardware snapshots, or do you need a backup, or is it a combination of these two? This is where the recovery tends to be different from what we are used to, right? And you know, we've been doing DR for ages, right? Disaster recovery. Recovering from a cyber threat is fundamentally different than recovering from a disaster.
Yeah.
Right? And it needs precision. It needs kind of piecing together the evidence and ensuring to know what's safe to recover from. And it's bringing these things together, right, to help the customers recover from a threat.
Yeah, let's kind of unpack what is good detection look like, and how do you really accomplish good detection?
Yeah, let's start with detection, right? So it's about leveraging the collective intelligence from all the sensors that you have out there. Some of these sensors are hardware-based. For example, we have flash core modules that can detect inline these corruptions, right, to data as they're written. Now, is that going to be an accurate indicator of cyber threats? Not by itself, right? So you take that as a sensor. It's much like our home alarm system. That's one sensor. And then you have some sensing or some detection you do based on file systems, right, with which you say, hey, based on read, write, and the IOs that I have going, I'm able to credibly detect there's something off here. And then, of course, you have backups, which you can say based on metadata or other analysis that we do. You can say that, okay, you know, I have more credibility that there could be something else going wrong. But think about this. Each one by itself only tells you part of the story. The complete story and the higher fidelity in detection comes from inferring across these. And this is where AI comes in, to our earlier point. And we are able to now say, I'm seeing 3 sensors go together per a certain timeline. This, to me, credibly indicates risk to your data.
Yeah, and I think what's powerful is that IBM has the technology and has had it there for, I mean, AI is not new. I mean, I know it's new in the buzz and all of that, but AI has been around in modeling, and machine learning has been around for a while. It's more how you apply it, because I think to your point, you know, it's understanding what is the place that I should go and recover from. So what is, let's kind of, you got detection. Now I've figured out what's going on. Now I got to figure out where to go back and actually recover from. How does that work?
Yeah, this is where companies spend so much of their time, right? Which is, okay, I've gotten attacked, right? Attack has already taken place or is in progress. These attackers, as we spoke about, they're rapidly expanding their blast radius, right? And in that time, what's happening here on the recovery side is teams are going piece by piece, copy by copy, trying to figure out, is this copy safe or no? Okay, shall we go to n-1, n-2, right? Point in time.
Right, the known good.
The known good.
Yeah.
So there is no like you have prefetches, right, in cache. There is no prefetched known good copy that you have as a baseline. Imagine if you had that, right? And you said, okay, hey, I'm aware that the attack has taken place. And oh, by the way, I already have a baseline that we can start testing, you know, get started with the recovery. So that's kind of what we are trying to go from, a place where teams are stepping through copy by copy into a holistic place where you can now, you know, not only just orchestrate across all the copies that you have at different points in time or with different, you know, levels of granularity, but you're also able to say, as a baseline, I know that this copy is safe, has been tested safe. So that I can now take it to my clean room, start testing, and then start recovering from there.
Yeah, I think that's totally a very important piece in gaining confidence across those silos that we were talking about, right? Because when you start to have teams sharing data and having the same methodologies to understand, okay, here's my known good and how I figured out my known good to start, it also helps smaller companies that may not have as many people to get in there and be able to start, you know where to start. It's a force multiplier to them as well.
Absolutely. And if you think about the earlier comments we made about DR versus cyber recovery, it's again like a home being invaded, right? So what's safe for one application may not be safe for another. So you need to have this notion of a safe copy per app, right, per workload. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't just help to say, I have this copy that I know is safe and then hand it over to my data team to go recover. If the application doesn't work, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's not going to help you at all. So that's where the notion of what's safe for one app may not be safe for another is the fundamental difference between a disaster and a cyber threat, because the extent of impact can vastly vary depending on type of attack.
Yeah, and I think we had some of your colleagues on earlier, and they said, I think by some of the research that you had done, it was like on average, it was like 300 days to know that somebody had been in there. And I think to that point, it's one of those things that you figure it out when it's too late, but you want to stop that. You're never going to get day zero fixed, but you want to not have another day one and go through that. And how are what you're bringing to bear really helping, again, to your earlier point, break down those silos between SecOps and storage and data teams, and how does data recovery really play together as breaking down those silos?
Yeah, that's a great question again. So if you think about traditional security has been perimeter, endpoint, network focused, right? So it's just kind of all these boundaries that enterprises used to have and have had for decades, right? But come the age of COVID and digital transformation that we've been talking about for a decade now, these traditional definitions disappeared, right? So which means no longer do we have a strict boundary or perimeter. It's really become more about the data, right? So what is it that data these security teams don't have with their tools? Right? Because you have XDRs, extended detection and response. Right. You got your CASBs, cloud access security brokers. You have a bunch of other posture management tools and whatnot. What they all lack is an awareness of the sensitivity of the data, right? Because security teams are grappling with all these events that are affecting the network or the endpoint. But what storage can give them, and this is where this whole category of cyber storage comes in, can give them a prioritization framework based on the data, right? The criticality of the data. So I think when you add this layer to the XDR, these teams now start trusting each other better, because security teams are now getting, out of the trillions of alerts that they have, they're getting the few alerts that they can respond to because it impacts the companies the most. So I think, long story short, the key point is we have to fit within existing workflows, because security teams have standardized their workflows. They have playbooks that they recover from using a SOAR, security orchestration remediation tools. So you don't want to recreate those workflows and create something sideband, right? You want to be able to fit within these existing workflows so that teams are not adopting something new. They're now incorporating intelligence into something they're already using.
Right, and it's bringing to bear all of the different things, so you're not just looking at the endpoints, you're not looking at that, you're actually looking at what's critical in the data, which is, I think, the key, because not all data is created equal. And so if something has to go back or be offline, and having background in DR and having had, we had at the financial institution I was at, we had over 500 different applications, and out of that we had 80 that were business critical, and out of that we had 8 that if they were offline for any amount of time, we were either getting fined by the SEC, or we were going to have very unhappy customers who couldn't get to their data. So I think that really is key to bringing that back together with SecOps and the data teams, understanding how they play together, and storage plays that critical role. Where do you see this evolving? Where do you see your tooling evolving from here?
I think what you just mentioned brings us to this minimum viable company, right? Which is basically saying, what are my critical workloads? How recoverable are these workloads, right? So even to give companies a visibility, today if you ask 9 out of 10 companies really don't have an idea of how recoverable their most sensitive data is. Because there are 2 questions there you pose. One is, do you know where your sensitive data is? And the second is, do you know how recoverable that is? Right? And you mentioned the SEC. It's important because SEC has now gotten regulations where all companies are required to report cybersecurity incidents via an 8K form.
Right.
So this brings accountability now as a boardroom discussion. It's no longer an option. It's a mandatory discussion in the boardrooms. It has to be documented. So the future, if you ask me, or even the present, right, of Defender is, it's the same values. It's basically, how do we build even better detection with even higher fidelity? Second is kind of, how do you recover your minimum viable company sooner, right? So we want to cut short that time. It can't take 3 weeks for a casino to get recovered, or for a hospital, even worse, right? If your operations can't proceed for two days, 2 hours, right? It's very critical. So shortening the amount of time it takes to get the minimum viable company up is something we are going to be maniacally focused on, right? And what this takes is sharing intelligence, right, across the different sources, across vendors. That's why we say data resiliency is a team sport, and therefore we will be working with our companies and friends across the industry so that we collaborate with the intelligence that we have. This is not different from 9/11 or other threats, right, that face the nation, for example, where teams are required to share intelligence and kind of come together so that you outsmart the bad guys.
Yeah.
And deeper integration with SecOps workflows and existing tool chains, right, so that you're not reinventing some of these workflows.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and really digging in there, because I think this is such a critical piece to how organizations are going to really come to build out, big and small. They need to have this. And to your point about minimally viable company and understanding that, I think the automation and making it simpler for companies to understand and take advantage of is unbelievably critically key to that decision. So where should they go to find out more about what's going on and how to understand Defender and get more information?
Yeah, one of the easiest things to do is just go to our website. Just look for IBM Storage Defender. I'm sure the link will be on the show notes. The other is to get started with a cyber resiliency assessment test. Right? This is an IBM, free for any customer that's interested, right? Where we analyze, what's your current posture like? What could you be doing? What are some of the simple steps that you can take? Because building resiliency is like building muscle. It's like strength training. You don't start overnight and go to lift 100 kilos. That doesn't happen in one night. So it's a journey, and you begin that by knowing where you stand, and then you kind of take those steps that you progressively improve your resiliency with. And then, of course, if you're interested, go dive into Storage Defender, right, and see what the demo can do for you. And I'm sure there'll be something compelling there. We're only at the beginning of the journey. Yeah. It's much more to go, right? And bad actors are not sitting on us. I mean, they're moving faster, so we have got to move even faster.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we'll put the links to that in the resources tab down below as well. Well, I want to thank you again.
Thank you, Rob. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you. And remember, you can stay up to date with all things cyber and data resilience by visiting SiliconANGLE.com. And thank you for watching this episode of IBM's Beyond Firewalls Resilience Strategies for All on theCUBE, the leader in high-tech enterprise analysis and coverage. Thank you, and stay tuned.
The IBM Storage Flash System portfolio offers incredible value in the market in 3 key areas: data resilience, sustainability, and modernization. Irons need to be prepared, and here IBM has an incredibly differentiated set of offerings. We can help customers discover the threat in their data faster than anybody else. We can help them recover faster than anybody else, and help keep disruption and cost to a minimum.
Today, I'm joined and very excited to be joined by Del Hubler, who's the Principal Storage Specialist with IBM. Welcome, Del.
Thanks, Rob. It's really great to be here today.
Yeah, it's always great to be live in the studio where we get to talk about these things, because I think, getting practical about cyber and data resilience is the key and the name of this. It's something I hold near and dear to my heart, as having been an IT practitioner and been on the customer side as well as being on the vendor side. And I think organizations really need to understand and have a better focus on this, especially with all the threats that are going on. We've had a couple of your colleagues on already. We've covered a wide range of things, from some of the data to what's going on with Defender. In your mind, what does it mean to be data resilient? What does that really mean to you?
Yeah, Rob, it used to be 10 years ago, you talk about backup, it's like you put data on the shelf and you only bring it back when you need to, right? Well, it's different nowadays. There's a serious threat against us, right? These guys are after our data. And to be data resilient, yeah, you have to keep the bad guys out, but you got to assume they're going to get in. So you have to put your perimeter defenses up, but you need to make sure your copies of data are secure and cannot be messed with.
Yeah, I think that's key. And like you said, I mean, I can remember sending 80 terabytes, which at the time in 2002 was a huge amount of data to be sending offsite on tape every night. And then trying to bring it back and trying to even make it usable in an emergency was, there was just not a lot. It was a lot of run books and things of that nature. How can and why should people really care about this, and why should they really take that next step? Because I mean, again, like you said, we've been doing things for quite some time now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now, compared to 5 years ago, it's the most important thing to do for your business today. If you're not cyber resilient, you're going to be in trouble. You need to make sure that your data is safe, because it's warfare out there. It's warfare. For example, I was actually at the MGM. Everybody probably knows about the MGM attack already now. I was there right when it was happening. Experiencing something like that firsthand, it's like, wow, right? Now, these guys aren't just attacking casinos. They're attacking hospitals. They're attacking infrastructure. They don't care who they're attacking. If they can get money from them, and now you've got cyber warfare out there, which really is about, I don't care about extorting your data. I care about bringing your infrastructure down, bringing your hospitals down. So that scares me. So now this is a real mission for me now, because it's not just a backup anymore. It's critical data that they're after, trying to bring us down. And so it's really, really exciting to be able to levy this attack against them.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I mean, data really is the crown jewels and the intellectual property of most organizations at this point. And as people know, you're gaining more and more data. You have AI out there. You're trying to build models on top of that data. And as we see, organizations just are trying to figure out, how do I get started with this? And how do I really start to become more resilient, especially the ones that are on the smaller side of the scale, as well as they're trying to understand, where do I start? What are the things I get? The MGMs, I mean, they have huge IT budgets and huge organizations, but where should everybody look to, put a stake in the ground, and this is where you get started?
That's a great question, Rob, and I get asked that all the time, because one time they'll say, hey, you know what, this is so big, I can't boil the ocean. I'm not even going to start it, right? So it's kind of like one of those things, like, I got to go do all of this. I'm going to give up on it, right? Well, no, you can take baby steps. Cyber security, data resilience is not about an on-off switch. It's a spectrum, right? From very weak to very strong. You never can be perfectly data resilient. The most important thing is to get started, right? You've got to take that first step. Your business, your company relies on it, right? And in cases like hospitals, for example, I'll talk about one of those in a few minutes. This is critical for patients to stay alive, and I mean that. So taking that first step, just take it. And you can sit down and take a cyber resilience assessment available from us, free of charge, vendor agnostic. We sit down very, very informally with your security team, your storage team, and your infrastructure team, and we just ask you some questions. We don't ask if you're using IBM. We don't ask if you're using XYZ. We ask you basic questions that say, do you have a plan? Have you tested your plan? And so at the end of that, you get an assessment, and you'll say, hey, I'm weak here, I'm strong here, maybe I could use some help. So then you can sit down with your IBM friend or your business partner and have that conversation. How can I improve this, right? How can I get better?
Yeah, and I think we had Jeff and Chris on earlier and talking about NIST and the NIST 2.0 framework, which is in draft and being looked at, and how you can start to move around the wheel and picking little places to start. And I assume that's where this assessment really helps you is, hey, let's look across that and get a better idea where you understand your own gaps.
That's exactly right, Rob. So where am I good? Where am I weak? Where did I need to start shoring up a little bit? And then you can take the baby steps. Get a little bit stronger here, a little bit stronger here, right? Everybody's got, say, I don't have any money to go be stronger. I need to do this, right? Well, you have to do this, right? And you don't have to do it all at once, right? That's the beauty. Number one, start by making sure your data is encrypted. Because first thing they're going to do is try to extort you or extort your customers. So if your data is encrypted, guess what? Your data's safe. They can't extort you there. The next thing to do is make it immutable, because the first thing that they're doing is going after your backups. They're going after your snapshots. If your snapshots and your backups are locked and secure, guess what? You have somewhere to restore from if they go after your primary data. So just take that first step, take that cyber resilience assessment, and we can help you and you start taking those right steps to get cyber resilient.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is that, everybody, no matter the size of the company, no matter if you're public or private, really needs to take, because it becomes one of these things that, and I think, again, Chris and Jeff were talking about, on average, some of the research that IBM has done is like 300 days, almost a year of somebody being inside the company and not knowing. And I've seen it firsthand with some of the companies I've been with and organizations I've talked to that, hey, they may understand and see that somebody's in there, but they're trying to get started and where to start and figure out how they got to that place. They hadn't done tabletop exercises. They hadn't done things of that nature. So let's dig in and really share some of those practical insights, because you see way more of this than I do. And I think, how has it been, or where have organizations and some real life examples of where they got started and how they went through this journey?
Yeah, great question. So let me start with a city in Massachusetts, local around here, right? One of the things that they didn't understand is how long would it take to recover my data? Because one of the key things that people don't understand is I have a backup. I can restore from the backup, I'm good, right? Well, when they tried to recover their data, it took 2 days to recover the data. It's like, wait, if it takes me 2 days to recover the data, I'm in trouble. The services for my city are down. So I am in trouble. I need to do something better. So it's not just about recovering your data. It's about recovering those key applications in your company that are providing services, right? So you need to make sure not only can I recover my data, but I can recover it quickly. So in this particular case, the first thing we did is we made sure their data was locked down. The next thing we did is we made sure their tier 1 applications could recover in a timely manner, so that the services providing service to the citizens of the city were not going to be without services for 2 days for that recovery to complete. So that's number one, right? So we had a real case where we're able to go in there, make sure that, hey, those serious applications that need to be there for the citizens, we can recover them in minutes, not days, right? There's another example of a hospital in the Midwest. Of course, a lot of the hospitals use Epic, which is a key application for patients sitting, whether they're in the emergency room or just a doctor visit. They did a test recovery of an Epic database. Of course, these things are very large, right? All the data that's in there, those Epic databases, right? Very large. And it took them 2 days to recover their database. Now, when you have a patient in the ER that needs some medication and the Epic database is down, which was attacked by a cyber attacker, by the way, they could not recover it timely. So they said, nope, our patients are number one. We need a better solution. So we were able to say, let's lock your data down. They can't delete your backups, and then let's make sure your recovery can happen faster. So that's another real example that affected patients' lives, and that really, really hit me home. And so helping design and architect their solution for cyber resilience was very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I think you hit on you want to test it before you get to it as well. And you want to understand that you have a known good and you have an outcome. And I think those are critical things that people really need to understand. It's not all about just the technology that goes in there that IBM can help you with, but it's really about the people and the processes that go along with that. And is that what you're seeing, is people trying to get more out of their infrastructure and really partnering up with somebody like an IBM so that they can join together on that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing, right? One of the things now that we know in this industry is that practice, when the time comes, practice, then you know you can actually deliver, right? It wouldn't be surprising to know that most customers have not tested a recovery. And if they tested a DR plan maybe once or twice a year, well, a DR plan, that's for that case when probably something maybe never happened, right? A cyber recovery, you're going to get hit. So having a tested plan, maybe preventative testing, scanning, right? Making sure that when I recover, I know because I tested it last night, I scanned it last night, and I know I can recover it in 5 minutes. because I tested it last night and I have a report that shows it. There's nothing that the CISO loves more than seeing that report that said I tested last night's backup and I recovered it quickly and I can prove. So again, basic preventative measures, proactive measures makes it when it happens, you're good.
Yeah, attestation and all of that, all the reporting that goes into that, and tying in with that, we were just talking to Ram about how we really tie things together from a perspective of how cyber and DevSec and DevSecOps and really in SecOps need to come together in that. Are you, when you're talking to customers these days, are they taking a seat at the table as well and you're having discussions not just with storage people, even though that's in your title, but you're seeing that others like the SecOps people are coming along as well?
Yes, absolutely, right? It used to be that the storage people sat over here and the security people sat over here. They'd meet each other at the water cooler, you know, talk about the football game last night or whatever, right? But now, guess what? They're needing to talk together because they have to share information. So the communication between the two, the better it is, the better chance they have of being cyber resilient. So having those conversations with both people in the room saying, oh, I thought you were doing that. Oh, I thought you were doing that. Well, you need to be doing it together. So security, infrastructure and storage together make sure that you can have an end-to-end data resilient solution.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like you said, using the cyber resilience assessment as a key that's, you know, funded by IBM that, hey, comes in and gives you that kind of, here's your gaps, and bringing everybody to the table and having the same sheet of music to sing off of as well is one of the critical pieces of that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you all have a plan and you see the plan, you review the plan, executing the plan together, it's more expedient and it's more efficient, right? So having that plan, that cyber resiliency assessment done, again, it's a couple hours of your time, and what comes out of it is invaluable. Now, here's the other thing, and I think maybe Chris talked a little bit about this. When the security person, the infrastructure person, the storage person all sit together, they get tremendous value saying, guess what? We can do this better. We can do it faster. We can do it more efficiently. So that cyber resiliency assessment will help you get a plan together and then execute.
Yeah, I think that's so key. I think being prepared, you know, is one of those mantras I've always held very dear to my heart, and having been there and had to actually execute my DR plans multiple times, I can tell you that you don't want it to take 2 days to bring something up that, you know, somebody like a government agency or somebody else, or like you said, you're a patient in a hospital and you can't have your surgery. That's not what you want to hear when you're going in there and you have something wrong. So
no, absolutely, you're right on, Rob. You're right on.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Del, for coming here and joining us. And, you know, again, it's always great to be in person and be able to talk through these things. It's a critical piece of understanding cyber resilience is a team sport, and understanding that data plays a huge role, a pivotal role in that as well.
It does. And you know, my message really is just take that first step, right? Because you need to do it for your company, you need to do it for your business, you need to do it for the constituents, right? So making sure that you take that first step, it's not hard, you're not alone, don't worry about it, just take that first step, that cyber resiliency assessment, and we can really help you get to a cyber resilient infrastructure.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Rob.
And thank you. And remember, you can stay up to date on all things cyber and data resilience by visiting SiliconANGLE.com. Also, we'll link to the Cyber Resilience Assessment in the Resources tab down below. I want to thank you for watching and joining us for this episode of IBM's Beyond Firewalls Resilience Strategy for All on theCUBE, the leader in high-tech enterprise analysis and coverage. Stay tuned.
Today, under most normal enterprise operations, if an attack happens, the first thing that needs to happen is figuring out where your best copy of data is. Is it a snapshot on a primary array? Has it been offloaded to the cloud? Is it in my backup? How do you know what your best copy of data is? And then, how do you test and recover that data? Do you know when the attack actually happened? Do you know how far back you have to go?
Yep. Yeah, I see it too.
And that's where IBM Storage Defender comes in. It provides you an end-to-end view of your data across primary storage and backup, lets you know which data has been checked for attacks and which copy is your best and where it's located. It also helps you identify which pieces of data need to be recovered immediately and which can be recovered over time because they're less critical to your enterprise mission.
And they don't just have to take our word for it. We can prove it. We can show them. We can show the demonstrations of how incredible our capabilities are.
Wow, what a great day. Thank you for watching this set of episodes on IBM's Beyond Firewalls Resilience Strategies for All. I think it's been a really exciting day. We've learned a lot. I hope you've learned a lot. And I hope you know where you can really get started with cyber and data resilience. What are the tools that are at your fingertips that you can apply to these problems? Some of the processes that you should take a look at, where to really get started with those processes because it is a journey. And then what are some other resources that you can apply to your organization to up-level your cyber and data resilience game? It's truly a team sport in which we have shown that practice is needed to stay ahead of the bad actors. There's no shortage of people out there with ransomware, social engineering, and many other techniques that are being used against us. We've learned that CIA, the methodology, not the agency, is back in vogue. And that really talks to, what is you're doing from a confidentiality perspective, authentication and authorization, all the way to the storage level, integrity being the I, cryptography, implementation of encryption at the storage level. How do you know what is integrity and that is a known good? We've talked about that many times throughout today. Availability, data is there when you need it. How do you recover it? How do you know how to find it? How do you know that it's going to work? That brings us to the importance of testing your recovery before you need to actually recover, being one of the most critical pieces that you can take away from today. It's if you don't know how your recovery is going to go and you haven't game planned it, you haven't done tabletop exercises, you haven't run through it in more than just twice a year types of time frames, you're really going to have a tough time when it comes to it because this is going to happen. You're going to get hit. Then we're also going to we talked about and learned about integrated signals between your storage infrastructure and SecOps systems, such as your security information and event management systems, your SIEM systems. I think it's really critical that to break down those silos, you need to really have that cross-integrated information, dashboards, and reports that can give everybody the confidence that you can not only back things up and the backups completed correctly the night before, but that you've gone through and tested on a regular basis some amount of your recovery of those systems. So again, hopefully you gained a lot out of today, and we want to thank you for watching IBM's Beyond Firewalls Resilience Strategies for All on theCUBE, the leader in high-tech enterprise analysis and coverage. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.